Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review, which is where we go through an entire album track by track, exploring each song in isolation and it's part of the larger whole. Today we're going to be looking at Dreamwell's 2021 album Modern Grotesque. Now I had thought that I had heard of Dreamwell somewhere in my history of being alive. The name seems so familiar, but I checked the channel, I checked the live streams, I even checked my personal listening list. There's no Dreamwell anywhere, so kind of makes me wonder who I'm getting them confused with. Anyways, let's dive into this. We have 10 tracks at 38 minutes combined. As you can see, we have a short intro track here. We'll run this into track 2, and then we'll break for discussion. Let's dive in. Bright guitars shaping out chords, muffled distant screaming. Very atmospheric, a lot of compression on the vocals. That album art doesn't tell me black metal, but the music does say black metal adjacent. It is interesting though, a little ominous like Twilight can be, but also on the cusp of beauty. Sunrise about to happen. Oh, you know, this could also be something punk adjacent too. Maybe in the post-hardcore area. I'm a fan of that. Deep resonant guitar, twinkly guitar. Nice contrast there. Lots of energy on the drums, lots of snare work. Bass filling in the low ends. So a 7-beat phrase for that brief moment. And back to a 4/4. bass getting in on this. I think that's going to go into the next track too. Just one solid album, no breaks. That'd be wild. I think it'd be very possible though. Very doable, especially with something like this. If you just continue to use feedback between tracks, yeah. But that's only 2 transitions, so we'll see what the other 7 bring us. So I was wrong about the black metal thing. There is a lot of fuzz and noise in here, but compositionally this is like what, post-hardcore something. It reminds me of bands like Cryptodira, who kind of merge melody and noisiness together in a very punky way and have loud, abrasive, vibrant vocals. Is that a good word for this? They're very passionate, but they're also very abrasive. Higher pitched fry screams, kind of on the thinner side. They don't have the width of like a metal fry scream. It also sounds a bit underproduced compared to, say, metalcore or alternative metal harshes, which tend to be overproduced in a way to create a ton of width, usually through layering. Here, it sounds like just one person doing the harsh. And in that realm, it actually kind of carries it closer to that punk and even, I'd say, black metal area of harshes. But it's also incredibly passionate. Even though it is primarily just one note, it's one of those harsh styles where there's no variability to it. You have this sound that you can make, so you lean into it. There is still some expressiveness to it. And I'm going to have to pay attention to this going forward because I'm just now recognizing it on sort of a gut level, but it doesn't sound monotonous despite being a single tone, despite being monotone. It has something to it, some sort of dynamic quality that isn't pitch. I got to figure out what that is in following tracks. But I do hope there is some more variability to it. I did notice that there was 2 words in here, maybe 3 words, where the vocalist dipped down into a speaking voice. It wasn't really sung, but it wasn't harsh vocal either. It was more natural. I'd like to hear more of that, whether it is spoken word or sung. Maybe they have clean vocals in here. I think that 40 minutes of just this one vocal style is going to be a bit much for me. But I do think that it conveys the intensity of the words. I hope the emotional resonance sticks with me over the course of this album. But as with vocalists in the past who stick with one sound, I tend to lose the emotional value as it becomes more of a background sound, a drone, if you will, in the track, regardless of how much emphasis and presence is put into that sound, the repetition of the tone. My brain ends up disregarding it in the sound and focusing on the more dynamic elements, which there are plenty of dynamic elements in this track. In both of these tracks, honestly. I mean, the first one gave us the chord shaping, these little twinkling bright guitars rising up and down around these chords and giving us chordal information one note at a time rather than strumming the entire chord simultaneously. I had mentioned that it felt haunting, even a little dangerous, but also beautiful, or on the cusp of beauty, possibly, likening it to the moments of twilight where it is still dark out, but sunrise is on the horizon. Or maybe this is dawn. Maybe it's like twilight into dawn is kind of what this feels like. Or like if twilight and dawn could exist simultaneously, which I know is like physiologically impossible, but you know, if it could, that's what this music would sound like. I think it does a pretty cool job of evoking both positive and negative emotions simultaneously. And then, of course, there's the screaming behind all of this, which feels angry, bringing another emotion into the fray. But track 2 expands on this. We still have this bright, twinkling guitar stuff over here, but we have really noisy, punky, wall of sound stuff on this side, much lower in pitch, much wider in body, and I don't know what it's playing. It's sort of a muddied mess of cacophonous sounds. Maybe it's chords being played really quickly. Maybe it's a bunch of notes just randomly mashing about on the neck of the guitar. I don't know. I had a tough time actually making out the specifics of it, but it is low and fuzzy and consistent and noisy. It provides a sort of chaos to contrast the beauty that's happening over here, much like the vibes of track 1. We're seeing high contrast here. There is a unification, though. The verse has this high contrast in the guitars, but they always come together to deliver something a bit heavier and rhythmic and textural. These little breakdown moments, they eventually do split back up, but like I said, they come back together again. And even the ending, the breakdown to wrap the song up, is a unification of those two instruments. So I do like this movement, whatever it is. Maybe there'll be something in the lyrics that help lean into this idea of duality being pulled together. And maybe this idea of trying to rip that apart or it falling apart. The eventual separation and an attempt to return to a singular. Beyond this, we have the drums, and they're very punky, very post-hardcore, lots of snare all over the place. And I think this is great for this style of music. The music as a whole has a lot of energy and momentum to it, a lot of directionality. It knows where it's going and it's ready to get there. And the snare having that loud crack happening constantly. Sometimes, when we listen to a lot of music, I'm like, oh, this has a strong backbeat element. Snare on 1 and 3 or snare on 2 and 4. You get 2 hits per bar. It gives you a nice, consistent rhythm to fall into. Yeah, this drummer sometimes hits the snare 7 times in a bar. It is really, I was going to say really overused, but I think that applies some sort of metric to it. It is used often in a way that, to me, prescribes a bit of anxiety to the song. It isn't just about keeping the groove anymore. It's about pulling the band forward. There's an intensity to it that I feel is really only matched by the noisy guitar over there. Pointed to the wrong way first. The two of these instruments create an urgency in the track that I think the vocals fall in line with, but the bass and twinkling guitar do not. They create a bit of a laid-back element, almost a foundational component to all of this. Although this guitar over here also does harmonic work too, laying out chords, which is nice because no one else really cares about the chords. This guitar is noise, it's texture. The vocals are texture, the drums are rhythm, and the bass is, aside from at the end when I heard at least a more melodic approach to the bass line, there's a lot of pedal tone going on throughout this track. So while we are getting a harmonic element, by itself for just getting a root note. If you just like, so I'm playing, C. Well, what chord is this? Is it C major? Is it C minor? Is it C dominant seventh? C sustained 2? Like, what is it? So you don't get a lot of information out of that, but it does provide some information, I suppose. So nobody else is really caring about chords. That's where this guitar really comes into play over here. So actually, now that I'm thinking about this, this is mostly, it's interesting because I got melodic flow throughout this. I found the sections that went into a purely rhythmic idea or textured idea, the breakdown sections with the unified approach on the guitars. I found these to be the variety. We were mostly in something harmonic, slightly melodic, something that I could latch onto. And then these moments were the oddity. This is where we moved into something more texture-based. That's actually not true, though. A majority of this track is focused on texture and rhythm. It's a very atmospheric track, and yet I didn't feel that. This guitar is doing a lot of heavy lifting, I suppose, because it's the only one I can think of that's really applying any sort of harmonic element to it or melodic element, simply because while it is giving us the chordal information, a lot of it is one note at a time, so it ends up being a sort of melody. It's a guitar lick. It's a riff. I mean, that's a riff too, but that's a noisy riff, and I can't really make out what it's doing, but it is providing a lot of emotion. So what is this song saying ultimately? It's definitely anxious, it's tense, it wants to find beauty, or maybe there is beauty in places, but it ends up getting twisted. This guitar ends up getting contorted into the more textured whole of the song, focusing more on that rhythmic idea. But these sections don't feel as chaotic, primarily because there's a unification of idea where the drums and the guitars and the bass are all focusing on one rhythm, but also because there's less intensity to it. We kind of lose the noisiness on this side as well to focus on a specific note or a specific chord for this rhythmic idea. We sort of jump back and forth between heavy weight, but a sense of calm, and then the chaotic nature of everything happening. And we swing back and forth on these until we get to the end, which introduces so many unstable harmonic ideas. That second chord was incredibly tense and dissonant, and from there things only get worse, especially once we add in the new melodic line that's center channel here. I honestly can't remember what instrument it was. Must have been guitar, right? There's no other instruments here. And it is so dark and tense against everything else going on. It honestly feels like whatever we've been oscillating between throughout this track has reached a peak of chaos and noise and discontent and discomfort. If those moments where the song comes together while still being heavy is the calmest moment, we shift to the exact opposite of that to wrap the song up. If this is a song about trying to balance things and finding a center in life, we have fell off this entire whatever we're on and trying to balance on entirely. We're now lying on the ground. That's what the ending is to me. It is a total failure of trying to find any sort of peaceful adjacent vibe. I've just seen the title. It's called Painting Myself a Darker Day, which does seem to be a title focusing on things getting worse. Let's dive into some lyrics on this one, see what's going on. So I actually forgot that our intro had lyrics. We should dive into that first. This one's called What Does It Mean to Live in a Grotesquerie? It's a short little poem It says the beating, the shaking, the thing carved in bones, the thing that washed up and brings plague to your home, the burning, the rusted, the blower of horns, the porcelain girl who must burden its scorn, the thing that sleeps and moans in the choir, the thing that awakens when the sun is devoured, its hate and its sorrow, its smile bleeds when it cracks. This is the martyr, the modern grotesque. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit lost on this one. I mean, yeah, things carved into bones, things bringing plagues to homes, things burning and rusting. Yeah, there's a bit of grotesquerie in here, sure, but I'm missing the key, I think, that ties all of this together and wraps it into this present, this singular idea of the modern grotesque. What is the thing that sleeps and moans in the choir? What is the thing that awakens when the sun is devoured? Because honestly, reading these words, I understand that some of this is grotesque, but modern? And maybe that's the interesting part of it, is that so much of the language feels a bit older. Porcelain Girl, I mean, this could be a doll of some sort too, but it's also not necessarily modern language. Bringing plague to a house. Yeah, we understand it, but that is not a phrase that most modern people are going to use. The thing that awakens when the sun is devoured also feels it feels like it could be part of some old folklore stuff. Modern science doesn't really fit with this idea of, well, I mean, unless there's some cosmic entity that is larger than our solar system and comes in and eats our sun. Some alien force. But you know, that's also very science fictiony. So that's just modern day folklore. I guess in essence that kind of fits with the modern idea, but I don't know, nothing else really does. And maybe that's the interesting element. It's using older language to describe modern things, but I'm missing the connection there. Also, it says that all of this is the martyr, the modern grotesque. What is all of this? What is the cause that all of this is dying for? I don't know. I'm very lost on this, and I hope that that understanding this opening track isn't required for understanding the album. Because if so, I'm going to be incredibly lost today. Painting Myself a Darker Day is about modern life wearing someone down and making them emotionally unavailable, and how this is a stress on their relationship with someone they care about. It says, I've been burning to get my life in order, always moving, but always on the verge of breaking, and sometimes I don't have what it takes to be near another. It says, I don't mean to make you feel like I don't care about the precious moments when our time intersects. I'm just nervous for the future and exhausted by the present, always on the verge of beating myself into the ground where I can get some sleep. I'm so desperate for sleep. So he talks about being worn down, constantly on the edge of being burnt out, constantly fighting to survive, just wanting sleep, and realizing that he's already has one foot in the grave. He describes this as being on the verge of beating myself into the ground, but also recognizes that death has a positive element to it. It's not something that he seems to vie after. I don't believe he's suicidal, but there's also this allure of endless rest for someone who can't find sleep in their own life. Something about that is alluring. It's not just that he wants sleep or needs sleep. The line is, I'm so desperate for sleep. We wrap the song up saying, I have nothing to offer but disjointed spaces, but these withered limbs, and my heart still beats, even when I'm motionless, and I'm sorry I've been distant from your side, from your life, and from your love. I don't want to be like this anymore. Yeah, dude, I feel this song. I connect with this song. I don't know that I'm 100% on board with the music of it. I think that getting over some of the noisier aspects is going to be a little bit of a hurdle for me. But lyrically, I get this. I think it's really interesting, too, that it is sung with this scream, which, if you're doing it right, really doesn't look like you're putting much effort into it at all. But it does sound like there's a lot of effort being put into it. I mean, it is called a scream after all, not compressed or harsh vocals. A lot of people will listen to this and call it screaming. That is an action that has a lot of emphasis, weight, power, and force behind it. And yet the song is about feeling like you're lacking in those elements, completely drained every moment of the day. Once again, it's this interesting dichotomy here where it feels like the song should be represented with dreary music and heavy vocals and lyrics, heavy sounds and vocals that sound like they're lethargic, low energy stuff. There's just not enough fuel in the tank to put the energy forward. Honestly, I think these lyrics would work really well in a grungy track or even doom metal. Something lethargic and weighty. And instead we have a track that is full of intensity, full of yelling and screaming. I think it works though, generally, because it's the feeling behind the lyrics. And it really is the final statement that I think pulls it all together. Without that, I think this falls apart a little bit. But it says, I don't want to be this way anymore. There is anger. There is contempt towards the way that this person currently lives their life. That is a passionate emotion. And I think that's where a lot of this comes from. And it really wraps it together in a nice bow and pulls the lyrical themes and musical themes together. There is a need, a want for simplicity. That's the unification going on in the music. It just never lasts for long. Life becomes disjointed and chaotic again, running around, constantly trying to make ends meet, being pushed to your breaking point. You might get a moment of peace trying to hold things together, but life becomes hectic again. He's so upset about this. He doesn't want to be this way anymore. This is going to be a heavy album, isn't it? This is only technically track 2, but it's the first full song on here. The next one's called Sayaka. Let's dive in, see where they take this. Interesting, both of the guitars are on the noisier side. This one using the crunchy dyads. Yeah, okay, the vocals are sounding more like a very compressed clean now, like a 90-10 compression versus clean. the ability for him to slip into the clean vocals without altering much of the timbre or coloring, it's kind of wild. Dude, isn't that Sober by Tool? The rhythm was that, but I wonder if maybe it was similar key too? I don't know. It felt a lot like it. Love the bass leading here. Although I guess it's more of like three-way counterpoint. All three instruments are kind of leading. Porcelain Doll? Is track one's lyrics going to be a bit of a medley? Something to pick out throughout the rest of the track? The rest of the album? I'm sorry for laughing. That just really caught me off guard. This incredibly emotional finale to this song. And then we have this heavy breakdown. Dun 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 dun. And then out of nowhere, this guitar over here does this, I don't know, maybe it's a pedal thing, maybe it's the whammy bars, but it sounds like a spaceship going wow. And it's such an odd sound to include in this. Everything is so harsh and abrasive and heavy. And then we have this like 50s sci-fi sound coming in over here. And it's so unexpected. It almost feels absurd. How, I don't know, like there is a break there. You can certainly put a sound in there. But I think that's also what elevates the absurdity of it, is that there is nothing else happening. There is a break of silence, and they could have just stuck with that, but they wanted to put something in there. And that's cool, dude. Lots of bands do that. But usually it's a guitar tone, like a very clearly defined rock, metal, punk guitar sound, or noise is a popular one. I could have seen them using the half-step interval to create some heavy dissonance there. That would have worked. Instead, though, it's this round, like manipulated pitch. You don't get a solid tone. Well, not a tone. You don't get a solid pitch. It's not like ba, wow. It bends, it curves, everything else is so sharp and disjointed, and this is rounded and smooth. I don't know, that it sucks too, because it was such an emotional moment. He was saying something about how he's just going to cut off all of his emotions. He's not going to feel anything anymore. And it's like all this screaming after the spoken word stuff. And this really should have been a peak to this track. And instead, I'm over here giggling about this guitar sound. I apologize. It's not funny. It's just so unexpected. All right, this track. There's less twinkling in here. We do get a little bit of it from all three string instruments in the bridge. I thought that was pretty cool. A nice little counterpoint going on there. And I think for once in the song, we have three instruments that are all working together on their own. Because prior to that, everything has been locked in as a singular, or it's been very contrasty. Multiple ideas kind of clashing by doing tonal opposite approaches to the composition. But here it's a collective whole, like clockwork, a bunch of pieces working together, doing their own thing, but being part of a whole. It stands out quite a bit from the rest of the track, particularly the opening verse of this song, which focuses more on that singular vibe with both of the guitars coming in heavy, focusing on rhythm and texture over everything else, the bass filling out the low end, and the vocalist screaming on top of all this. It's very unified in its aggression. I think it's what makes this bridge so interesting, because it isn't just counterpoint. It is counterpoints that up to this point we have listened to probably close to 6 minutes of music so far, where we have never heard anything like this. A collective whole. I like that. It adds a bit of weight to it in the context of the album. Now, I had mentioned that the vocals at the beginning reminded, actually, I don't remember if I vocalized this. I thought it. They remind me of La Dispute. In fact, a lot of the opening of this reminds me of La Dispute, more so than Painting Myself into a Darker Day. But I think a lot of this comes down to the vocal delivery, which sounds different than what we got at the end. The end, I'm pretty sure, is pure Fry scream, but the beginning, I think this was compressed clean, because you can still hear a little bit of pitch underneath it. There's a lower element, almost like I don't know if I'd say bassy, but a lower pitched resonance that sits as like a floor beneath the compression, beneath the crackling harshness of it. And there's actually 2 points when he's doing this that he can reduce the compression and just kind of focus more on that resonance, which sounds like his spoken word voice. This is very different than what we heard at the end, which has a very shrill, high-pitched sound, the same thing that we heard in track 2. So we actually have 3 different vocal styles in this. We have the cleans, we have the harshes, and the compressed cleans. I dig that. It's going to help a lot, I think. And especially breaking the song up with clean vocals too, and spoken word sections. It's going to make the album more digestible for me. You know, I was talking earlier about being a little wary that track 2 might be the sound of the album and that the vocals would wear me down by the end of it. But a track like this instills some hope in me that I can enjoy this all the way through without really getting tired, because it's only 40 minutes. I shouldn't get tired of an album that's only 40 minutes long. But I mean, musically, the band has the sound. Granted, we're only 3 tracks in. There's still a lot of time to redefine their composition and general sound and atmosphere. But they're in that noisy post-rock area of music, and they've sat around that this entire time. A little bit of emo twinkling in there, but to me that is more of a spice added at times, more so than a defined sound. So there's not a lot of melody coming from the instrumentation most of the time, And if we had stuck with the vocals in track 2, there wouldn't have been a lot of melody there either. So I'm glad to hear more melody coming out of this. And this track right here instills a lot of confidence that I might actually end up enjoying this album more than I expected at the end of track 2. Now the drum work in here is a bit more... It's interesting because there's more flourish to it than the last time, but there's also more sections that just lock into a beat. There is less of the heavy-handed snare work that we saw on track 2. And I like this because it means that the drummer can interpret the vibe of a track. What are we aiming for with energy, with intensity? Obviously, they can't manipulate the harmonic elements of the emotion, but they can certainly alter the feelings based on speed and intensity. They can hit their drums lighter, they can use less drums, more drums. There's all sorts of ways they can still manipulate the energy and emotion of a track. And hearing these two tracks have two very different approaches to the drum work tells me that this drummer understands that he can influence the emotion in the track, and that they're trying their best to figure out what the song needs at any given moment. And I like how this one feels a bit more reserved at times, but more flourishy. There's more cymbal work on this one than the previous track, or I should say more flourishy cymbal work on this one. It feels a bit brighter because of that at times, but it also feels less aggressive since we've reduced the amount of snare in it. I'm really enjoying that varied approach to drum work. Overall, though, I'd say this track feels very similar to the first. Emotionally, it is overbearing. There's a lot of anxiety and weight in this track, but there is that moment of positivity in the bridge. Everything working together, creating this beautiful, intricate work of art. I think it's worth noting that it doesn't stick around for too long. We do have the clean vocals in there, but it builds up into something noisier and aggressive, and then that transfers over into something textured and rhythmic to wrap the song up. So the melody is pretty much completely gone by the final 40 seconds of the song. But we do have a brief moment of beauty and even calm, possibly. I think the song is also going to... Well, actually, there's also the melancholy that I kind of get from the clean vocal section. It builds into something more intense, but it starts out in a lighter sort of regret, maybe, or fear. It's a vulnerable section. Still a negative emotion, but different from the rage and anger that we hear elsewhere. I do think, though, lyrically, we're going to be experiencing another thematically heavy track, so I'm prepping myself for that. Let's check them out. Well, there's two ideas going on here, and I'm not sure how they really relate. The beginning talks about someone who is completely dead behind the eyes. There's just nothing left in them. Says, if they could look in his eyes, have you ever known a man to hold an abyss in his hands? I wish you could hear his voice and you would know that he's not far. Would you still be there when he pushes you away? I think that you would be. You never had the strength to walk away. So you have somebody who feels decaying inside, empty. This kind of lines up with our character from last track too, the similar vibes of just feeling completely wiped out on the inside. But there's also a negative element here, specifically speaking to this other person, saying, would you ever walk away from this person? I don't think you would. You've never had that strength. Kind of calling them weak or dependent in a way. It then says, weeping like a mute stone, singing like a stuffed bird, lying like a snake in the garden, and hiding like a savior. I need someone to believe in because I need someone to deceive. I need someone to betray. So at the beginning, we had someone who was numb. Here, that same person possibly actively engages in deception. But then after this, they almost seem like a victim of abuse. It says, if I cannot feel, then I cannot be loved. I will march through all of your lashings. You can't hurt a person if their body is empty. I'm a porcelain doll. I'm fragile but lifeless. I won't feel anything anymore. And that's the part that's repeated at the end over and over and over again. I won't feel anything anymore. The idea of marching through the lashings and being empty so you can't hurt me, that was the escalating part leading up to the mantra stated at the end. This was the one that was said in the the lower energy, lower pitch cleans, the higher pitch cleans, and I think it goes into a scream too, but I don't necessarily remember what escalated the third time through. That's another section that is repeated over and over, becoming mantra-like, just like the final statement of I won't feel anything anymore. How does all of this fit together? This is a person who feels dead inside because it's the only way to get through terrible situations in their life that seem to keep coming back. But they're also ones who they revel in deception and betrayal. I don't understand how all this fits together. I don't understand who this person is supposed to be. It might be the concept of abuse and the cycles of it. By abusing someone, they will eventually abuse someone else. It's the only way of living that they know how to be. But I don't know if I can really draw that conclusion from what's stated. It's more of a common theme in other works that I'm trying to apply here because it kind of fits. I don't know. If anyone has their own interpretation of this one, I'm interested to hear it. I also do think it's interesting that the porcelain doll pops up here, as it was stated in the first track too. A bit disjointed in that one. I couldn't figure out its placement, but here we go, bringing it back up. And I do wonder if we're going to see more lines or more phrases from that opening track appearing in these other songs. Let's push forward though into track 12. A crouching tiger waits for prey that never comes. Ooh. So we got a snare on every 3. Lots of melodic work on the drums though, keeping a groove but keeping it pushing forward. A bit of dark beauty from this guitar line here. Oh, now it's noise. We do have chords, but it's mostly the texture of all of this. 2 chords. Ooh. And back to the opening. I was meaning to ask, I thought I heard a second screaming vocal on the last track too. I forgot about that. See what I'm talking about with the drums leading emotion? I love the transformation of this guitar line here from 16th notes to 8th notes, bringing the energy down while still retaining the melodic intensity. Oh. I feel like I should pause. This is building into the next track, right? But what if it isn't? All right. That ended up being a bit shorter than I expected. I mean, it is 4 minutes and 10 seconds, but it's also only like a 3.5 minute song, and the last 20 seconds of that 3.5 minutes is, well, actually, I guess it's the last 30 seconds of that last 3.5 minutes is just that one lick over and over and over again. And that itself was an extension of the section prior to that. It was the same guitar part, the right guitar part, just less notes per bar. Instead of 16, it's only 8. Same notes though, same movement. We run with that for a while, and then there's a transition, presumably into the next track, with this winding down of sound and a building of droney kind of thing over here that's going to pull us into the longest track. Oh no, it's not the longest track. So the next track is 5 minutes long, but we do have a 6.5 as the penultimate track. I'm looking forward to that. You don't see too many 6-minute post-hardcore songs. So that's going to be interesting to see what they do with that and their general storytelling, which I think this song does a great job of doing, as they all do. They have a way with atmosphere and emotion and using the various sounds that they have to evoke specific emotions, whether it is noisier guitars or brighter, pluckier guitars, melodic drumming or intense drumming, loud, harsh vocals or spoken word or sung vocals. They have a lot of duality in their writing. And I think they do a great job of evoking all sorts of different emotions. What I find most interesting, though, in this track is how frequently this guitar is doing something pretty, and how that clashes so hard with the weight and the despair and the general melancholic vibes from everything else. There's so much angst and sadness in every single track we've listened to, this one included, that having this beautiful guitar line over here in 2 different sections of this track, mind you, doing 2 different riffs, it stands out. It's almost as if this album consistently focuses on the negative elements in life, but really desperately wants these things to be positive, consonant, not tense or angry or sad. There is this general need for things to be better. This is the optimism of the music. It's not always, I think, portrayed lyrically, but it is frequently portrayed musically. A positive notion within something generally heavy and dark. And it typically feels both distant from everything else, unique in its sound, timbre, coloring, sonic choices, and harmony. But it's also such a clear part of the track, too. The hope isn't something divorced from the everyday feelings that they're going through. I think this song really highlights that with the more usage. That's terrible grammar. It uses this guitar more, though, than other songs. It uses it for brighter ideas rather than coming together for this unified, usually a textured or rhythmic idea. I wonder if this song is going to focus lyrically on hope more than the last track did. Though hope was a big part of track 2 as well, or maybe not a hope, but at least a want or need to be better, for things to change. It didn't necessarily explicitly use the word hope or even anything along that type of optimism, but at least it was a recognition of the problem. There is a positive element to that. It isn't just about wallowing in this negativity. I think we'll see some of that in here too. Otherwise, this track, I mean, they have a sound. They have a sound, and this song fits in with the other 3 that we've listened to. I don't have much else to add to that. They have their 3 string instruments. They do stuff, usually noisy, rhythmic, textured stuff. The drummer, as I said, dude, really carrying energy in here. That entire double time section feels so anxious, so ready, or maybe not ready, to be pulled into the future, really dragging the rest of the instruments into the next section. As they continue to play in that halftime feel, the drummer's just going twice as fast as everyone else. It adds a lot of character to that moment, but not too long after this, we get these beautiful extended tom runs. Something that does keep a general 8th note rhythm, which gives us our rhythmic pulse, but is also constantly moving all around the kit. It is melodic drumming here. It's a beautiful idea that I think lightens the mood quite a bit, that they themselves increased the intensity of just moments prior. Let's hit some lyrics. And here we have a song about someone who is distant from someone who is important to them. It's possible even that this distance was brought on by the other person, a separation of distance, literal distance between them. Says, sometimes I hope this emptiness, this nothing that I feel, is a sign that you don't think of me anymore. Can you feel it when I think of you? So they feel so disconnected from this other person, so out of touch with their life now, that they don't even feel like they're being thought of anymore. This is both a comfort to them at times, but also incredibly distressing, because as this distance, the separation of these 2 people, as the amount of time that it's been since they were together increases, they find their memory becoming more faulty, and this is distressing to them. Says, I've known you for too long to have just forgotten the words to your song. So why can't I hear it sung on the breeze? I could pick your voice out from a choir of everyone's prayers, so why can't I remember the way that you sounded back when you told me you loved me? I can't hear your voice if I can't see your face, and I don't want you to know what I've been thinking, because I've been thinking that things are better when I'm gone. I will be gone. It's so distressing to them that time has robbed them of something that they hold precious. That this is the second song that seems to focus on, and again, I could be misreading this too, the idea that things will be better when I'm gone, I will be gone, I read as suicide, but it could also just be an acceptance of death in general. Regardless, it's the second song that seems to have a neutral or positive perspective on death. Maybe not, again, in a suicidal way, but just seeing the benefits of non-existence compared to the detriments, the pain, the anguish, the survival of existence. It seems we're being attacked on all angles at all times across our mental and physical beings. Sometimes death just does seem, or maybe not death in general, non-existence does have an inviting element to it. And this guy, in both of these tracks, whether they are completely fictional, about two completely fictional people, or if this is the vocalist speaking their heart, speaking their mind, this theme continues to pop up, that they are in incredible and immense pain, emotional and mental. There's got to be some way to improve that. And the sad reality is, throughout all the songs so far, they haven't really found a way in existence to improve that. It seems to be just the way things are designed to be for their life, their environment, whatever. I think that's why non-existence continues to be brought up in the track. But they are haunted by this too. The opening line says, "What is the sound that creeps through my window as I try to sleep? And what does your voice sound like when it's being carried by the wind?" Once again, focusing on the ephemeral elements of these of the voice being in the past, only having your memory to go on for it. All right, yeah, melancholy. Interesting, though, I don't feel any hope in this. No positivity other than the non-existence at the end, which seems to be a comfort of sorts. I'm finding it more and more difficult to figure out where the twinkling guitar fits thematically into everything, since it does try to bring a beauty or optimism to every track that it appears in. It doesn't really fail, but it doesn't succeed either. Track 4 does end with the twinkling guitar. It does seem to outlast the noise. I think that's the only track so far where it does that, but it also isn't one that lyrically is positive. So I don't know how that lines up. But I appreciate the continued existence of this guitar, which I think does line up with some of the themes in the lyrics too. A perseverance through all of this harshness. I don't know where that perseverance comes from yet. They haven't really explained it, but as hard and as heavy as their life is, or all of these lives, I don't know, I doubt this is a concept album, even though there are a lot of thematic similarities here. But as hard as things get, they keep going. There's always another day, and maybe that another day is going to be the same as the last day. But they give it a shot. And maybe that perseverance is what the guitar is supposed to represent, as many times as the music tries to snuff it out, go for that heavier, grittier sound, the twinkling guitar always comes back. A little light against the weight and darkness of this album. Now, I bring this up, and I just looked over at the next title. It's called Plague Father, Vermin Son. Yeah, this can't be good, can it? Something about that title makes me feel like we're going to enter into some generational trauma here. This isn't going to be good. Let's dive into it and see where Dreamwell takes this album next. Ooh, slight bend. We still have the drone from last track here. We've got twinkling stuff on the left. We have these bent chords over here though. be a martyr. All right. We had a really cool bass lick there. Yeah, that's what this song is about. It's interesting that I'd say this is one of the calmest songs of the album, despite being one of the heavier topics. Coming to terms with your blood, with your legacy. That's heavy. Oh, we're back to this being the twinkly side. Lots of tension in here though. Incredibly unstable section of the track. All of that build up to come back to the chorus. Yes, solid track right there. It's probably my favorite from a musical standpoint so far. And a lot of it is because it is a melodically focused track. I mean, the verse has an interesting switch up with the twinkling guitar being over on the left. But even our guitar on the right isn't just noise. There is tension in its chords, sure, and it is a heavier tone, but it's not quite the sound that we had from track 2. A heavy bit of noise versus the twinkling melody. This one's more balanced, more measured, leaning more towards a consonant sound overall. Also, solid chord work there. We have moving bass lines throughout both the verse and the chorus. And in the chorus, too, we switch the guitars back and we get to twinkling over on the right, but we do have this constant melodic, bright guitar tone throughout this entire thing. There's almost no place in it where we unify the song into heavy textured work. There is always melody. There's so much clean vocal on this one, too. I do think it is interesting that I find this to be thematically one of the heavier tracks, though, and is musically the least heavy song we've listened to so far, barring track 1, which was just a clean electric guitar shaping out chords. That was pretty light. It's an interesting dichotomy there, but I do think that the general melodic elements of this track embodies hope more than anything else. This is the brightness finally winning out. This song feels, the bridge, right? We got to talk about that. The bridge is heavy. It is tense. It is dissonant. There is a lot of harmonic instability in here, and it bounces back and forth between less unstable and more unstable, less dissonant and more dissonant. There is release only because it is a lesser degree of intensity, but by no means would I call this a movement between resolution and tension. This is tension through and through to varying degrees. It feels like an internal struggle. Not just because it is a moment of tension against a song that generally works with a beautiful palatability, but also because so much of this song is harmonious, instruments working together towards a single consonant vision. Then we move into this, and it's tense, it's clashing. So much of this feels in opposition, but also think about that word too. This section is clashing. These are about notes that do not work well together. There is conflict in the note choices. By playing these two together, you're creating conflict. You're creating contrast and dissonance. I really think that's the point of it. I didn't pick up all of the lyrics, but I picked up enough, maybe. The song is about trying to come to terms with your upbringing. The idea of, being who you are because of who raised you. Coming to terms with your blood and your heritage, and trying to figure out who you are and how you're going to represent yourself moving forward, who you want to be and what part of your past is going to be a part of your future. It is about conflict, who you were, who you want to be, and how they're different and how they clash. Choosing a section of this song for the chords themselves to be clashing based on the notes that make them up sounds incredibly appropriate for this theme. And so I think this works on multiple levels. Yes, the bridge clashes with the rest of the track, but the bridge clashes with itself. It is tension. It is opposition in the very essence that it is dissonant chords. I think that ends up working incredibly well. But I also love how the beautiful melodic stuff is the dominant sound here too. Throughout the verses, throughout the choruses, coming out of the bridge back into the outro, which I mentioned it was the chorus. I don't think it is the chorus. Musically, it's reminiscent of it, but I do think there's some variation there. I do think it is a unique section to wrap the song up. But it is all brighter. It's these melodic guitar lines. And what have I called them in the past? Optimistic. This is positivity bleeding through this song. That even when the clashing happens and they try to figure out who they are, the brighter, optimistic side wins out. That's how we wrap the song up. At least that's my interpretation of all of this based off of, the 5 or 6 lines I picked out of the track. There's probably more depth to that, and we'll get to that in a moment. I do want to bring up one little detail, though. There is a second vocalist here, right? I think this is the at least second, maybe third track that I've heard it on. It is a more piercing fry scream. I mentioned that the lead vocalist, their fry is a bit higher pitched than their compressed clean, but that there's still a resonance to it, a bassy resonance. This other vocalist that appears at times, a lot of the fry scream timbre feels similar, but it's missing that resonant low end, and it's more of a piercing high end. It feels sharper. It could be the same vocalist, just backtracking themselves, but parts of it feel unique. Now, granted, it's not a lot of it. I'd say like 80% of the timbre sounds very similar. It could very clearly be the same vocalist, but there's enough in it that feels unique. Like it's the exact same technique, colored by their natural whatever. Muscles, mouth shaping, the things that make their sound unique, things that you can't really control too much of. It's your natural vocal coloring. Even though we're talking about harsh vocals here, a lot of the way that your body is the shaping of it and stuff is going to color all of your vocals, harsh or not. So I wonder, I guess I'll have to look this up. we're at the halfway point now. Might be a good time to dive into some context on this. I'll go see if the person who requested it gave me any context. I'll hit up Wikipedia and where else? Maybe rate your music, see if I can get a personnel list. And yeah, we'll do a little bit of talking on that, some background info, then we'll hit the lyrics for this one. All right, there's not much to add that I could find about this group. But I will say that they are a 5-piece group, a vocalist, 2 guitarists who both do backup vocals, a bassist, and a drummer. I wonder where those backup vocals come in. I wish some of these sites would have more detail. Backup harshes, backup for gang vocals and stuff like that. Like, let me know what kind of vocals they're contributing. So I don't have any extra information about those background harshes. I'm still kind of curious about them. The track, though, it's pretty much what I caught from the few lines. It says, your teeth aren't the only part of you in my veins. This anxiety is a black stone that you vomited out when you swallowed your children. Also says, I did everything I could to not learn anything from you. But how to be a martyr? I think that's an interesting thing. Talking about having such passion for something that you're willing to die from it is something that he shares with this parent. Now, we have this idea of how to be a martyr, which is a callback to track 1, or maybe track 1's a foreshadowing for this, but later on it also says, you must have engraved the worst parts of you in my bones in some sick attempt to reverberate the evils that you have sown into your home. That's another callback to track 1, but it makes sense. And I'm starting to see that the modern grotesque is just people. And all of the negativity that can be embodied in a single person from factors outside of their own. I think that's what's really going on here. The sadness that comes from losing people in your life, the emptiness and numbness that comes from being abused in your life, of having so many external forces creating stressors and tension on you that you can't even be emotionally available for the people you care about. How all of this turns us into isolated, numb, emotionally wrought people, shells, husks of humanity. That is the modern grotesque. it comes from our upbringing. It comes from our environment. All of it compressing down around us, removing what makes us human. Now, I don't think this is a universal truth, but I can see this. I think people are more resistant to this, or maybe more resilient, still trying to shine through the compression. But the fact that I find this to not just be relatable in some ways, but also something I have seen in other people. The sheer idea of being worn down by existence, especially in a post-2020s age. Yeah, this should not be as relatable as it is. Maybe not entirely, but at least parts of it are. This isn't an isolated event, and that's what makes it grotesque. I fear then the rest of these tracks are going to continue on in this dark path, and the final track is called Sisyphean Happiness, which doesn't evoke a happy ending either. Coming back to this track though, the final stanza simply states, "I don't hate you anymore, because if I did, that would mean that I still think of you at all." And a willful, purposeful decision to not have this person have any effect on your life anymore. To not even think about them enough to hate them. All right. This next one is called You Dreamt of Me, I Dreamt of a Mountain of Salt. Let's dive in. That's an interesting title. This is very contrasty from the last track.
Surrounded by places unknown, lit by suns that burn to death. The sky is flooded out by smoke, look as empty as the North Star. Home is somewhere long forgotten, but it once was here. There is nowhere that flight can touch. There must be somewhere that I can breathe. Lungs expand with burning air, but it's all I see. If love can't be a sin, then
I love how this masterfully balances tension and release. Ooh. A shift to a 3 with a slight tempo decrease. I love how just slightly out of sync the two guitars are. Creating a beautiful little pocket there, full of tension and joy. Tension and calm, I think, not joy. One thing I forgot to bring up, a little bit of extra context, is that the citizens of Rate Your Music, what do you call them? Rate Your Musicites? They dubbed this Screamo. I'm really curious about that because my ear hears post-hardcore pretty much everywhere, and this song is a really good example of that. What's the difference between Screamo and post-hardcore? Maybe I don't know the difference. Anyways, this track is, it's just noise and heavy and dissonance and gritty textures, and not a single point of it really felt like I wanted to be there listening to it. There was that neat little section with the two escalating ideas just rising with each other in that 3/4 section. I like the drum work at this moment. The bass had a little bit of a cool idea, a lot of pedal tone, but then a nice run at the end. But this mix of calm and tension I thought was really provocative. Evocative? Evocative. That's the right word. It didn't provoke me. It evoked an emotion out of me. And just the sheer duality, but shared weight. A lot of this album, anytime that we have this duality of something a little bit brighter and a little bit darker, it's always been the darkness winning. It's always been the part that swallows up the brightness. But not here. It feels even. It feels balanced. Something about it that feels... I hesitate to use the word, but it is what I keep returning to. Natural. And it is stuck inside of this track, surrounded by grit and noise and filth. I don't know how to interpret all of that. I see the patterns. It doesn't say anything to me, though. But it is the lone part of this track I enjoyed. Everything else is noise. It starts off loud and abrasive and dissonant, and it shivers down my spine. It makes me feel small, compressed in. There's no room to stretch. My body cringes in on itself. I hate all of what happens at the beginning of this track, and the ending really isn't much different. It's a different flavor of it. It approaches these sounds differently, but it's still the same. It's loud and abrasive and gritty, and most importantly, dissonant. It's just all of these clashing sounds simultaneously. This is the angriest track, and I find it wildly intriguing, interesting, if nothing else, that it comes after the calmest track we've had. I also noticed at the end of this song that there was a repetition. I don't even remember what the words were. They were just repeated over and over and over and over again. And then eventually cut to a halftime version where I think they said the same thing, just like really emphasizing one syllable at a time. Many tracks have had repeated mantra-like statements, and I wonder how much of that is to aid in some way an understanding of a feeling or a vibe. How much of this is a repetition to help the characters or maybe the person? Again, I don't know, concept album or not. But for each song to come to terms with something or to reinforce an idea, to manifest through willpower this idea by simply repeating it. It is a strong element of this album to present the problems, try to fix them, or confess knowledge of ways to address the issue. And then, though, to lead into a statement that will help achieve that desired outcome, or to really hammer home a desired outcome in order to force a reality to be. And I think that's an interesting perspective, particularly if we look back on Plague Father. The end of it is a repetition of, I don't hate you because that would mean that I think of you, or something like that. To repeat that over and over and over almost makes it manifest into reality. Maybe they do think about them. That song is certainly one of thinking about their upbringing. But if they state this, maybe it can become a reality. Maybe they'll think about this person less and less. To manifest it through positive speech reinforcement. And I feel that's true on most of these tracks. Anytime there's a repeated phrase, it doesn't necessarily feel like it is a core tenet of themselves, but it is something they wish to do. They're not screaming it because they believe it. They're screaming it because they need to believe it. They need these words to reinforce who they are. Let's find out if this track lines up with my hypothesis on this at all. Let's dive into some lyrics. And it seems that for every couple of tracks that I understand lyrically, they throw one at me that I don't. There's some really evocative imagery here, though. The beginning says, surrounded by places unknown, lit by suns that burn to dim. The sky is blotted out by smoke, and locusts have eaten the northern star. I really like that last line. I don't know if it's because of track 5's Plague Father, or because track 1 already introduced the concept of plagues, but this idea of locusts destroying sense of direction, the North Star, the thing that points you to, or gives you direction, allows you to know where you're at. That a plague now makes our protagonist feel lost. Says home is somewhere long forgotten, but it was once here. And there's nowhere that this blight can't touch, but there must be somewhere that I can breathe. So they feel like they're choking wherever they are. It's the smoke, it's the plague, the locusts, that this blight has gone across the land and has ruined everything. So much so that it's even destroying the air that they breathe. The next stanza moves into this. It says, the lungs expand with burning here, but it's all that I can see. Now this is where the song begins to take a turn, and I don't know where it's going. It says, if love can be a sin, then may all of man be turned into a mountain of salt, and may the wounds in our hands burn as we ascend, and may the pain that we feel remind us all of the power that we have to pull down our masters, pulled down by chains. Sin is the burden that we must bear, the sin of those who took our love away. I will always look back, look towards the mountain. So there is a general element of overcoming adversity here. But I don't understand how all of it fits together, and how love is this sin that allows us to transpire and overcome these hurdles. And I don't get how all of it works together. It does seem to be pointing in some sort of direction that pain makes people stronger and allows us to overcome obstacles. What does that have to do with love, and why is this all seen as a sin? I don't know. What is the mountain that he looks back on? Is the mountain where he started at the beginning? where the air was corrupted and burned his lungs as he breathed it. He also mentioned that if love is a sin, then may all men be turned into a mountain of salt. I don't know. I feel like I'm right at the cusp of getting it all, but I'm just not connecting the dots here. So again, I extend an invitation. I mean, as usual, you want to put your thoughts about lyrics into the comments 100%. I love reading other people's interpretations, but particularly in places like this where I'm lost, I'd love to hear other people's interpretations of it, just so that I might better understand what they're singing about, what they're trying to convey with their words. Now, this next track is only 90 seconds long. Gonna guess it's an interlude. We're gonna run this into track 8. This one is called The Vessel Bears My Face. It's gonna be followed by the Lost Ballad of Dominc and Anneghi? I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm gonna have to look that up later. Let's dive in. Beautiful slides with the delay and reverb. Really lovely combination. This is just going to be it, huh? I mean, it's a beautiful lick. The spoken word or sample, I don't know what that was, helped a little bit. I don't know that the riff is strong enough for 90 seconds, though. A little long, but solid idea. Now this feels emo.
He sailed the burning ship towards moonlight, reflected on the water, but never got close enough to swim in pallid lunar tides. So we just drowned in the saddest thing about him is he's part of me forever by my hand. And the saddest thing about him is he's part of me and more than just the honor of his name.
There's so much comfort in the music, it's almost jarring to hear the anger in the vocals.
I let him stay, I left him behind. I left him behind, or so I thought.
The cymbals, really nice addition.
A corpse and heart alone. His face was made of glass, the vision of apathy breathing. Kiss me one more time before I fall into pitch cold darkness. One day I will never move again.
interesting how the guitars haven't changed much, but it's completely altered the weight of the song. It's a slow evolution of riffage on both sides, as this one pushes more into faster delivery of arpeggiated ideas with a sharpening of the tone, while this one becomes a rounder, blunter sound. It's more noisy, compression. They've both escalated in their own ways, parallel in rising intensity, but different in effects. Yeah, dude, okay. So we took the ride cymbal rhythm and then put it on the snare to pull us into this new collective drum passage. And because of the reverb and the slowing down, it feels less intense and more melancholic, while also addressing a memory element. Feels like we're pushing into the past here. And it is called The Lost Ballad. Oh, it goes into the next track. I can't run another 6 minutes. I need to talk about this. It is interesting that it's called a lost ballad when I don't really feel too much sadness in it. There's pain, for sure. The vocals deliver that really well, but musically, no. The beginning of the track is bright. I don't know if I'd call it positive. I can't remember the term I used when I was describing that opening section during the reaction itself, but yeah, sad's not necessarily a term I would use for it. It was an comfortable. That's what I used, I think. And it was this comfort versus pain that I saw between the instrumentation and the vocals. Now, what's really cool is, what I was talking about with the guitars is that for majority of this track, they're doing their own thing in parallel. It almost feels like a linear song in that both of these guitars are building up their own idea, their own intensity, their own form, but doing it their own way. They start off both kind of in this twinkling emo kind of thing. The beginning of this song felt very emo to me in a way that the rest of the album hasn't. But they're both kind of bright and twinkling, a little bit of harmonic separation there, where one is more comfortable and bright and the other one leans just a hair bit into something moodier. I can't quite place it. Maybe it is a sprinkling of melancholy, bringing a sad element to the ballad, but I don't know if I'd say that that's specifically what it is quite yet. But these two instruments, they begin to build up in their own ways, where our right guitar begins to explore sharper tones, really honing its sound into a singularity, continuing to focus on these brighter, higher pitched notes, while also shifting its emotional element away from a comfort or a calm. I think calm was the word I wanted, not comfort. Calming is what I called it earlier. But shifting away from that into something a bit sharper, maybe even a little distressing. Still working with a more beautiful, brighter tone overall though, whereas our left instrument begins to flatten out, widen out, and become something a bit more blunt, reducing its pitch into something lower and noisier. Rather than refining into something sharp, it becomes something blunt and fuzzy. It becomes this texture, this wall of sound over here, sort of just festering away, in a sense, devolving, moving from something singular and specific into something rounded. And I don't know, it's less formed, but it is this noisy wall over here. I can pick out the chords and notes being played here a lot better than track 2, but it does feel like it continues on in that same vein of what we saw in track 2, with the noisier stuff over here and the brighter melodic stuff over here. But it's interesting to watch this split happen in real time. They're both rising in intensity in their own ways at the same pace. It creates a song that feels like it is completely directional. This track is a slow burn, constantly pushing towards a very intense ending. But it's actually two songs moving in two very different directions that just happen to support each other. It's a very cool realization, I think, halfway through this track when I started to pick up on what the guitars were doing and how they were working in equal but opposite directions to reinforce this idea in the song. Musical parallelism. The drums in here were pretty slick too, and I'm really continuing to dig what the drummer is bringing to the table. Once again, still really keyed in to the emotional resonance of a moment and realizing how best to get there and how best to be in that moment. Right there at the end, I had noted that we kind of lightened up the intensity of everything a little bit, and the drummer switched to the ride cymbal, had this nice little light rhythm on it, and then silence, nothing. Then back to the rhythm, and then a break. But the fourth time through, rather than doing the rhythm on the ride cymbal, they do it on the snare in order to build intensity up, both in volume, but also in something a bit more prominent in timbre. The size of the snare is a lot larger than the little tinginess of the cymbal, especially the ride cymbal. And this allows him to build into the next section with the band, which has more intensity to it. But the drummer chooses here to do something rather melodic, choosing all of the parts of the kit and incorporating the toms into this too, as well as a lot of cymbal work while keeping the backbeat on the snare and keeping the consistent rhythm on the bass kick to be both the metronome and the emotional signifier. There is a lot of forward momentum here, a push towards the end of this track that follows along with the intensity rising of the fill itself. It was just really well done, and just another example of the drummer's fantastic emotive writing on this album. And that's not something I get to talk about very often, emotive drum writing. So I'm really glad it's going on here. The vocals are intense and as painful as always, whether it is the lack of energy in something more lower, clean sung or spoken word, or the animosity and anger of the harshes. It consistently comes through as a character full of pain and negative emotion, just trying to make sense of all of this. I didn't talk much about track 7. I think I said what I needed to say about it when we were listening to it. It's a cool riff. I wish something else was going on there. Let me dig into whatever's done in that spoken word section, and then we'll look at the lyrics for track 8 and push on into the longest track, our penultimate track of the album. Well, 2 in a row now, bit lost on it. It says, the man who held my mind for me died the other day. He sailed a burning ship towards moonlight reflected on the water, but never got close enough to swim in pallid lunar tide, so he just drowned. The man who held my mind for me is something that continues to elude me. It says the saddest thing about him is that he's part of me forever by my hands, and he's a part of me in more than just the honor of his name. I'm trying to figure that one out too. The honor of his name. See, here's the thing, right? The man who held my mind, having a same name, could be a family member, but it could be a version of himself as well. It says, I let him search for what he could never find, and I let him sink, and I left him behind, or so I thought. But he washed up on shore, a corpse in heart alone. His face was made of glass, the vision of apathy breathing. A lot of really vivid imagery here. but for the life of me, I can't figure out what it all means. It says, one day I will never move again, but make no mistake, my chest will still rise with shallow breath, though the gloss in my eyes will mimic death. Once again, feeling dead inside, representing someone numb and empty, but still alive. This is something that has come up 2 or 3 times on this album now. The ending says, I will find a way to make you hate me. I will push you away. I will burn down our home. I will find a way to make you hate me because it's in my blood. It's in my bones, and I will be alone. This is reminiscent of track 2, of pushing someone away that means something to you. But it also brings up, was it track 3? No, track 5, Plague Father. That he feels that it's part of who he is to be cruel to the people around him. I don't know how to interpret all of this. But I do see parallels thematically woven into this from other tracks. It also incorporates a little bit of the opening, the first song here. And I am continuing to see more and more of these lines from this intro interspersed throughout the rest of the album. As I mentioned earlier, I was kind of wondering if it was going to be a medley of lines or ideas from the album, and it is, at least lyrically. All right, let's move into the title track here, 6.5 minutes long. Let's see what they do with a little bit of a temporal extension. Oh! The reduction of energy, but not a release of tension. I like that movement there. Also a rare shift to 3/4. A lot of this album is in 4. Once again, hearing the guitars trade roles back to back like this, it's a very cool movement that, I don't know, scratches the brain in just the right way. almost become a little post-rock with this slow layering and expansion. Interesting deconstruction of time here too, where there have been groups of 8 and 4 and I think 3 even. It's been the evolution from that faster moving drum part that took us into this section into this halftime feel right here. Very heavy and very weighty. I don't have a lot to add to this. I'm just gonna let it keep rolling. We'll see where they wrap this up. Alarms. I don't like those two tones, man. I think that's one of the fastest moving guitar riffs all album. The most technical too. Back to a lot of snare usage. Okay. Dude, I love the way the drums became that pattern. It's interesting how pitch is not incredibly important right here. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Brave Little Abacus at this point. Why does the left guitarist always want to introduce some interesting noise in the middle of an emotionally resonant moment? I don't know, dude. That's a fade out would have been just fine. It allowed me to sit within the mood here. A little somber, little pensive. Not quite as heavy negatively as everything else, but still thoughtful. And then the guitar slide with the reverb and the delay. I don't know. I think just allowing that to ring out would have been less intrusive. Well, modern Grotesque takes on a bit more of a post-rock vibe, which I thought was pretty cool. A slow evolution and additional layering of ideas through a pretty lengthy midsection where we start off relatively minimal, mostly just drums. We build in the guitars and the bass there, the vocals, then we add more vocals, we add more guitars, bigger guitars. It's this evolution that we saw. I don't remember what track, was it track 7? Nope, track 6. I think it was, with the two guitars, parallel movements, doing their own thing, but, both moving in the same direction. And we kind of saw some of that here too, not necessarily that same parallel movement, but the slow escalation of both of the guitar parts alongside the bass part in order to increase the intensity and layering of this point. In a very post-rock exploration of an atmosphere. We don't need to change atmospheres. We don't need to reduce the energy. We just need to keep seeing what this has, keep digging deeper and seeing what's there. So I thought that was kind of cool. I think it works well with the time. 6.5 minutes really isn't that long. And I think that the song was well paced and had a lot of emotive energy there. And the build up into the peak was, yeah, dude, solid. We move into Sisyphean Happiness, though, and, well, this is much like a lot of the other tracks. We got noise, we got twinkling sounds, sometimes they swap roles. The drum work in here is incredible. As always, I love the evocative nature of it. I love the more melodic elements that it brings to the table, and I love its control over the emotion. What stands out to me on this final track, though, is the vocals. I wish we would have seen more of this. To me, there's an incredible amount of emotion here with the constant switching between the spoken word and the screams. It is both the sharp contrast of having spoken word, one syllable, and the next syllable being this piercing scream, but it's also the wind down too, as the compression is slowly released off of that natural speaking timbre, and we get more and more of that clean vocal there. It's interesting to hear the sharp shift one way and then the gradual return the other. It's incredibly powerful, and maybe it's more powerful because I hadn't heard anything of it like it on this album. Maybe it has this strength because of contrast, not just within itself, but again, nowhere else on the album. I'm not expecting the vocalist to do this. But I found it to be one of my favorite points on the album, and a lot of it is because of the vocal direction there. I do kind of wish some other tracks had explored that, particularly in their peaks. But maybe it also works here too. There is rage, but there's also, I think, in the spoken word, a bit of reluctance or apprehension. I don't know that we've really heard that anywhere else, and maybe that's why this vocal style is only used here. Regardless, I find this to be a great way to wrap this album up and to kind of bring the energy down without releasing much of the emotion. It is still a fairly negative finale here. It's still painful, difficult to listen to. It's heavy. It's just not quite as aggressive as some of the other tracks, but that doesn't mean that it's lost its bite. Let's dive into some lyrics, see what's going on in these last two. I am so incredibly lost on this. This is the first track that I feel really pushes into a religious and even spiritual element, but it also seems to be speaking negatively on Christianity in particular. It talks about a noble preacher of the cardboard pulpit. So basically a preacher to no one. Says your sermon will be worshipped by rats. Broken bottles pull blood from your gums. I am hunted by the sound of trumpets bellowing over the hill. So now we have the trumpets from track 1 being present, but also the 7 trumpet sounds of, was that the one that produced the walls of, I'm gonna have to look that up. My Christianity is a bit weak today. Usually I'm pretty good at picking up on these. There were some walls that needed to come crashing down though. I feel like one group was attacking another, and when the trumpet sounded for the 7th time is when the walls crumbled and they could attack. So he says he's being hunted by the sounds of trumpets though. I wonder if that's what it's alluding to. Interestingly, here though, we shift back to, I think, something that lines up with Plague Father. It says, maybe I wasn't speaking clearly enough, he said. Some things were never meant to be seen like by lowly men, but I have seen now his eyelids were painted black. I am but clay, and I am shaped by the words etched in my skull. It talks about being controlled by his memories, by his upbringing, by his past. It says, maybe if I split myself open wide, even if you could believe the things I've seen, I'm praying to know who blows the trumpet, who burned my name in the clouds. Sinner, believe in what I've seen. I've seen the face of the Creator, and I fear his hunger, his teeth. What kind of fool would refuse to believe? From here, though, the story gets darker. It says he stood illuminated by the fire in the barrel. What was he burning there? The air was thick with the stench of flesh and hair. He raised his hand up to the clouds. The smoke clung to him in a shroud. A shard of glass glimmered in the fleeting rays of sun. Then he brought it down hard and fast between his ribs. One swift shot to the ribs. He raised his hand again to touch the face of God. He just kept plunging downward and downward, 2 in the hands, 1 in the feet, 1 in the throat, 5 holy wounds. The blood, how it flowed. The martyr, the modern grotesque. This song depicts someone who seems to be entirely out of touch with everything, described as a preacher of cardboard pulpits and worshipped by rats. He also seems to be described as possibly a homeless person, someone who has a barrel of fire and in it bodies. And there's this ritual element here of sacrificing, but also stigmata. Self-imposed stigmata, not spiritual stigmata. He puts the wounds into his hands and his ribs and his feet by himself. Calls this man a martyr. The modern grotesque. I wonder if it's supposed to be commenting on people who make everything up themselves, who might hijack some other larger following. It doesn't seem like this person is much of a pastor at all, someone of the faith, but they're certainly using the imagery and the words of Christianity to turn themselves into a prophet and then to not have stigmata themselves, the miraculous forming of Jesus's crucifixion wounds on a body, but instead to self-inflict them. But I don't know what the purpose of all of this is, to point towards this, to use this metaphor, to imply it within this album. It seems so distant from everything else. But it still seems to be about someone who is lost and trying to find their way. Maybe that's what's being pointed at here. But also, I had come up with my own interpretation around track 5 of what the modern grotesque is, or at least my interpretation of it. And this doesn't line up with that at all. I'm curious what everyone else gets out of this one. I think it works generally. This really long linear story alongside this escalating post-rock idea. I like how all of that works together to create this escalating tension throughout the track, especially if you're following the story while this energy continues to rise. But I don't quite get the lyrics on this one. They seem to be surface level, and I get that part of it, but there has to be a second layer to this. It has to be relating to something else. I just can't make that connection. I had mentioned a lack of energy or enthusiasm in the final track, and almost winding down of emotions. That's kind of true here. The opening stanza says, I have got no other promises left, and I'm all out of hopeful words to give. I admit I've been suffering for so long that I've run out of eloquent ways to express it. It's just kind of running out of steam at this point. The second verse says, I'm looking for something new in my life, something worth shouting into the light. But if I don't have sorrow, all I have is hatred, and I think the world has enough of that. Once again, just kind of feeling at an end of things. Not really sure what to do moving forward, because right now they're just spinning their tires. They're doing the same thing that they've always done, and hasn't fixed anything. The situation, as dire as it is just normal at this point. The chorus says there's something to be said about the way we learn to die, finality as an enemy instead of a chance to start again. There's something to be said about a peaceful end. I had mentioned a few times that I've picked up on this theme running through this album, that again, I don't get the notion that this is talking about death as a positive force, something to run towards. There's nothing suicidal about this album, but there is a romanticism of non-existence. The idea that life is pretty tough and there is something to be said about a peaceful end. He says a lot of people run away from death. They're scared of it. But why? It's a chance to start over. It's got to be better than this, right? The end of the track is a single stanza. This is the part that is spoken word, but sometimes screamed. Show me a god that doesn't spill blood and I'll show you a rusted machine. I think that's interesting. It is a very narrow view of religion as a machine for, presumably in this sense, control. That if the god doesn't spill blood, then the machine doesn't work. That it can't control anything. I think this is fairly true for a few of the top religions, but there's plenty of, well, I mean, here's the thing though, gods, not religion, gods. I might have to think about that one a bit deeper. If a god doesn't spill blood, then they're not worth worshipping. But it also views it as a machine, something as a means to an end, which I think does purport religion to something that is a means to an end, at least from their perspective. It says, if, when I die, it should all start again, I'll pray the next time is a smaller hell. So let the spirit cycle down and watch a smile crack the face. Sisyphean happiness here. The idea, Sisyphus was doomed to push a boulder up a mountain, and when it got to the top, it would roll back down, and he'd have to do it again for all of eternity. This is Greek mythology. Anyways, the happiness of this, trying to find something positive within the toil of existence, I think is what is going on here. He says that if when I die, reincarnation is a thing and I come back, all I ask for is a little less that I need to persevere through. Doesn't need to be a perfect, comfy life, but anything better than this would be acceptable. He says, let the spirit cycle down and watch a smile crack the face. I think this is interesting. He talks about kind of losing the will. I view it as losing the will to live. The spirit cycles down. It runs with less energy until it comes to a halt. It stops spinning. And as I reach that point, I will begin to crack a smile. There is again this romanticism with what comes next. Again, not focused on death, but then non-existence, or maybe the next existence will be better than this. And that hope puts a smile on his face. Like I mentioned in the music, there is a little bit more, well, I suppose there's less antagonistic elements in the music, but it doesn't remove the weight. And I think the lyrics are that same way. There's still a punch to be held here. This is still a heavy section of the music. But it isn't the intense weight and aggression that we've been experiencing on this album. There is, albeit in a sort of twisted kind of way, a light bit of levity to these final moments, musically and lyrically. And I find that that is the biggest gut punch of the entire album, is that the only point of hope in here is non-existence. It is death. Whether that is nothing after or some sort of afterlife or reincarnation, that the only hope is that this life ends and the next one is better. And that is the only point of elevation in this album. And it is how it ends too, by basically stating that I've said all of this a million times before, nothing has changed. I don't know if there's even any point of shouting into the void anymore. I'm just tired. And maybe death will bring a change that's worthwhile. Like, no one should feel this way. It is ridiculous that this album, that I can find elements to relate to in this album. I'm sure many people can. And I think that is, to me, still the modern grotesquerie. Is that a word? It is the modern grotesque. Is that this album can be as relatable as it is, despite being so incredibly dreary and uncompromisingly painful. At least that's my take on all of this. What did you think of Dreamwell's modern grotesque? Did you enjoy it? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own opinion or perspective on the lyrics, the music, any of that? Please put all of that, as well as anything else you'd like to add to the conversation, into the comments section below. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We're going to do a 2-hour live stream, sometimes like 2:15, 2:30. 2 hours is usually the minimum, though. We check out some music, we hang out, we laugh, we have conversations that are sometimes music related, sometimes not. Just, it's a chill, laid back time to just hang out with some cool people and listen to some cool music. If that sounds like a blast and you can make it, I highly suggest you do. Otherwise, Monday I'll be back at the usual time for more of the typical reactions. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back to... No, I already did that part. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening. Whenever you choose to watch my videos, I got a little trigger happy with the button. Have a good rest of your day, folks.